Morning, friends. Great to have you here. Something fresh and new and exciting had happened in Anthony's life in recent months. It was like he had this whole new longing for the presence of God. He was hungry that his life would be shaped by the habits that would lead to godliness, and he longed that others would see in him a love for God that was transformative. And yet at the same time, this young man was deeply conflicted. He reads of the disciples giving up everything to follow him, to follow Jesus. And when he reads those words, it feels like he is being asked to do exactly the same. He reads Paul's words, pray without ceasing. And he just knows that somehow he has got to shape his whole life so that he can give every waking minute to prayer. So eventually, Anthony takes the plunge. He sells the farm. He sells his 250 acres. He gets rid of his other obligations and he heads for the Sahara Desert 2 hours south of Cairo. Unencumbered by the comforts and the luxuries of life, Anthony is excited to encounter God in a whole new way. He knows that in those extreme conditions, he will develop character that an easy life doesn't produce in you or me. 230 years after Jesus had headed to the wilderness, Anthony heads for the same. We know so much about this young man because one of the church fathers, Athanasius, wrote a life of Anthony. And he tells of Anthony's years, decades actually, of solitude. He speaks of the remarkable experiences of fasting and prayer, of battles with demons, of divine provision, and long periods of intercessory prayer. And over the years that Anthony was way out in the Sahara, his reputation grew. People started to come out to find him. The Emperor Constantine, hearing stories about this man, wrote to him and said, "Please pray for me and my sons." And when people found him, Anthony dispensed wisdom and the power of God. People were healed and delivered. And of course, many didn't just want to visit, they wanted to stay. They wanted to become like him. Athanasius says that by the time that Anthony passed, so many people had come out that the desert had become like a city. That many monastic communities, and these were the very first ones, started to develop in the Egyptian desert as a result. And they became a praying powerhouse for the extension of the gospel around the world. Now here's the connection with today. For the next 1,000 years, these monastic communities played a more significant role in shaping the world than anything else. And I want to remind us this morning as we start of just a few of the highlights of those 1,000 years. Yes, we do 1,000 years in 10 minutes this morning. I realize too that we're from a whole set of different theological traditions, and so some of us at least would go, hang on, I've got some questions about monasticism, just to say it's not for today. The question for today is, what can we learn from these young Christians? What do they have to teach us in the Everything Conference at the beginning of the 21st century? So the story moves from the deserts of Egypt to the wastelands of the falling Roman Empire and a civil servant by the name of Cassiodorus. Cassiodorus had watched the Roman Empire slowly fall apart. Cities are dismantled, libraries are burnt, public education system disappears, and he watches all of this from his vantage point as chief civil servant. He can see the consequences of what is happening, and he is deeply disturbed. It's like, doesn't anyone else understand what is going on? We are losing here 1,000 years of knowledge. Philosophy, mathematics, literature, all disappear. How on earth are we going to raise the next generation of engineers and architects, of public officials and teachers, if this is all gone? And so Cassiodorus, approaching the age of 70, realizes that his key life's work is still to come. He leaves his profession, he devotes himself to God, and he builds a monastery, and in that monastery at its center is a library, and he gathers in that library as much knowledge as he can find, and he starts to fuse Christian thought and the classics. And he sees scripture as paramount, but the classics are there to serve the understanding of scripture and equip Christians for what was then the modern world. He brings together a huge body of work for the next 2 generations. It's a long story, but the next 2 generations build on that work until there is a vast survey of human knowledge. Monks then painstakingly copy this knowledge over and over and over by hand. And then that knowledge is slowly dispersed throughout the barbarian empire and becomes the basis of all teaching in the West for the next 800 years. So whilst Anthony creates communities where people could serve the world through prayer and holiness, now they're starting to shape the way societies think and the knowledge that people have. One more figure. And this now is a story of more concrete transformation. For if Europe were to flourish, it had to be physically transformed from a land of forests and swamps to something more cultivated. And it was the monks who led the way, taught by St. Benedict and his rule to essentially do 2 things, to work and to pray for the glory of God. Imagine these numerate, literate, disciplined individuals with a sense of the seasons and ready to spend every daylight hour working for the glory of God. The result? Dense woodlands were cleared and wetlands were drained on an absolutely extraordinary scale. It was the monks who introduced the rearing and breeding of cattle and horses, the brewing of beer, and the raising of bees and fruits. They were responsible for the corn trade in Sweden, for cheese making in Parma, for salmon fisheries in Ireland, and vineyards all over the place. Much of the time, the profit from the activities was invested back into these monastic communities, so they were not only productive and transformative, but they became wealthy as well. So these monks interacted and became generations of farmers, craftsmen, technologists, and business people. Historians say it was this cultivation of the land led by the monks that laid the foundations for Europe's preeminence for 500 years of world history. Historians say that wouldn't have happened if the monks had not laid the groundwork for that. And of course, for those of you that are creatives here and are feeling slightly missed out at this point in time, the creatives came into play as well. They created buildings of great beauty, some of the most breathtaking being the cloisters and abbeys that still adorn Europe today. Others gave themselves to the visual arts, and created beautiful paintings, extraordinary sculptures, and stunning stained glass windows. Then they filled those places with amazing music. They actually invented musical notation and enriched the scope and sophistication of choral music as never before. Wherever there were advances in the arts, the monks were at the very forefront. Now, I find these guys, Anthony, Cassiodorus, Benedict, and many other women and men who we have not had time to mention, extraordinarily inspirational. Anthony reminds us that we start with God. He was not thinking of cultural renewal when he went out into the desert. He just wanted to live an abandoned life. There was a reason why we started with worship. That is always the place to start. Cassiodorus reminds us that Christianity cannot be kept in a separate box from the rest of life. God cares about everything. So every part of life should be integrated with the gospel, and powerful things happen when we do that. Benedict reminds us that whatever work we do is for the glory of God, and that if we do so, it can have transformative effect. Together, they remind us that all of this life is to be done with a foot in Christian community, reading the scriptures, prayer, relationship with one another, and the other foot in the world around us. Together, they also remind us that the renewal of culture is often preceded by the outpouring of the Spirit. It's why it's been so exciting to hear news of a quiet revival, of young men particularly coming to church in the UK with some stunning statistics, as well as record numbers of Catholic baptisms over Easter in France, and young men going to Eastern Orthodox churches. Who would have thought, with love and respect to the Eastern Orthodox in the United States? But finally, I'm reminded of the generative power of the gospel. When J.B. Phillips was writing his translation of the Bible, he said it was like trying to rewire the house with the fuse box still on. Imagine what it would be like if we were to place this crackling, power-filled energy system of Scripture at the heart of sector after sector after sector. And imagine the new life that might flow as a result. Today, we get to hear from our own equivalent of the monks. You might not have known that you were that. But authors and artists, broadcasters, business leaders, musicians, filmmakers, politicians, and school leaders who are doing their work for the glory of God and the renewal of culture. But the point is not that those up here allow the rest of us to sink into some sort of lethargic haze. This job and this task and this calling is for us all, that we would imitate those who have gone before us and follow God's call to work for the renewal of all things today. It's so great to have you with us this morning. Thank you very much.